Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. And what do the Greens do? After finally showing their true colours as the party of Hamas, as the party of left-wing union thuggery and donations, bribes, as the party of communism, and as the party of environmental destruction in the name of net zero energy, they have a problem. Their traditional base of decent Australians concerned about the natural environment is turning away from the watermelon Greens. So here's the Greens' answer. Resurrect a bill which was already defeated because it's a stupid bill, and use this to pretend the Greens still care about our precious natural environment. The intention of this bill is in the name: ending logging in native forests. Regional forest agreements will be made subservient to environmental regulations, which will tie logging down in the courts and bring logging to an end. End logging. All those workers, many of them fine union members, will be out of a job. Logging that produces timber for, amongst other things, the very seats the Greens are sitting in today, right now, which were made from logged native timber, Western Australian jarrah and Tasmanian myrtle. Putting aside their hypocrisy, it's clear the Greens think their supporters can be gullibly convinced by a superficial virtue signalling stunt. After all, who would oppose protecting native forests? Well, actually, the Greens oppose protecting native forests. Green energy policies are blasting the tops off mountains in old-growth forests to erect 300-metre-high wind turbines. They're clear-felling thousands of kilometres of forest for access roads and the power transmission lines to get the power hundreds of kilometres back to the city. Thousands of kilometres, in fact, back to the city. Thousands of hectares of native forest is being permanently destroyed. Blasting has released arsenic previously locked in sandstone into our waterways and aquifers. In the case of the Atherton tablelands in North Queensland, pristine North Queensland, aquifers contaminated with arsenic will eventually come to the surface in the middle of the Great Barrier Reef through underground basins. Unlike forest taken for logging, forest damage from net zero energy is not regrown. The access roads are required for maintenance for the life of the turbine. The transmission lines are permanent. Unlike coal mines that are remediated at the end of the mine, there's no remediation bond on industrial wind, solar and transmission lines. So these things will be a rusting blight on the landscape for 100 years, for the community to pay for taxpayers to pay to rehabilitate, for farmers to rehabilitate. The Greens are environmental vandals. And I tell you who does support protecting our native forests: One Nation. We would end the environmental destruction from net zero energy measures and restrict solar panels to build up areas where the energy is needed. We would end any new wind turbine subsidies and instead promote vertical wind technology. One Nation will prevent logging in old-growth forests. Regional forest agreements are an accord between the federal, state and local governments to supervise the timber industry. This means the Greens believe they know better than the state governments, all 6 of them, who have been managing their forests for 200 years. Aboriginals have been managing Australia's forests for tens of thousands of years, including through the use of burning off. Each state government consults with Aboriginal communities in the development of regional forest agreements. Aboriginal voices only matter, though, to the Greens when they can be exploited to advance Greens technology and lock Aboriginals into victimhood and dependency. Generations of ongoing development of forestry agreements, planning out supply and demand, protecting sensitive habitats and protecting old-growth forests, all that great work involving communities, industry and government, torn up and thrown away because the Greens think they know better. Playing God, playing Tsar. What an ego. And to what benefit? The Greens are proclaiming their love of housing and promising to build more houses than anyone else. The question arises, out of what are they going to build those houses? The Greens want to shut down the Australian forestry industry, the conventional steel industry, the gas industry, the diesel industry and the cement industry. The Greens are proposing to build houses without timber, steel or concrete. Well, the last time I looked, pixie dust was not a building material. Does the CFMEU know they're hopping into bed with a political party that will remove from the market all the materials tradies need to build a new home and build new apartment towers, while also removing diesel for tradies' generators and utes, and which they now propose to tax out of existence? I don't want to confuse the feelings coming from my left with facts, yet that's what I do. I deal in facts. At last mapping, there are 131.5 million hectares of native forest in Australia, which is 17% of Australia's land area. And there are 1.8 million hectares of commercial plantations, including pines and eucalypts. This is where most logging occurs, yet it's not enough to sustain Australia's demand for timber. There's 30 million hectares of land, most of that privately owned, which can be logged under the careful management of regional forest agreements. Last year, 2% of those 30 million hectares were logged, meaning Australia is logging 600,000 hectares out of the 133 million hectares available, less than 0.5% of our native forests. So, what happens when a forest is logged? Is it clear-felled, never to grow anything again? Of course not. Forestry is about renewal. That's the whole point of regional forestry agreements. The logging industry is allowed to go in and take the productive timber, remove the stunted and useless timber, and then leave that forest to regenerate for 10 years or so before returning to repeat the cycle. Habitat is not destroyed, it's enhanced. Forests are not destroyed, they're enhanced. Rather than helping our forests, this Greens bill will harm our forests. Logging removes the fuel from the forest. It thins the trees and protects native forests from bushfires. There are huge areas of this country that have never fully recovered from the bushfires during the drought because some native forests contain so much fuel they burned like hell. What happened to the wildlife the Greens profess to care so much about? They were incinerated, agonisingly, cruelly incinerated. The damage to native flora and fauna caused in those bushfires resulted directly from restrictions on burn-offs, something sensible forest management would have mediated and tried to, but the Greens stopped it. This is the problem with communists. They think imperious proclamations are a substitute for good government, facts and data. They are wrong. Let's be clear. It's been illegal to log old-growth forests for the entirety of this century. I know there's been some intrusion into old-growth forests. This bill from the Greens won't deal with that problem, though, because the intrusion is mostly coming from the construction of wind turbines, access roads, solar panels and transmission lines, which the Greens adore and love and drive. Illegal logging that damages old-growth forests must be prosecuted, and One Nation will prosecute offenders. One Nation opposes this bill because we are the party of the environment and we know the current system is best for the environment. As someone who has personally planted thousands of trees and rehabilitated land and protected coastlines, I know One Nation is now the party of the natural environment. Thank you.